Pro wrestling never had a racism problem. It had a racism tradition, passed down like a dusty pair of boots, along with headlocks, carny slang, and the God-given right to say something wildly offensive in a locker room full of people who couldn't punch you out without killing their push. The industry's rotten racial track record isn't just baked into gimmicks. It's tattooed onto contracts, woven into booking decisions, and locked in hotel room shoot fights that nobody wants to talk about, unless a podcast check clears. And yeah, it's more than blackface and bad merch. This is real-life bile from men who didn't just play racist heels, they brought it into the locker room, the office, and the courts. These aren't gimmicks, these are receipts. You're about to hear 5 names. Some will surprise you, some won't. One of them wore half blackface and somehow thought he was the good guy. Another ran a sex cult that makes Manson look like a misunderstood improv coach. One was so racist that Hank Aaron himself came down from the corporate heavens to personally end him. So let's quit pretending pro wrestling just had a few bad taste moments. This was systematic, personal, and in some cases, criminal. Now cue the pyro. We're burning reputations today. You know your industry's broken when a mid-carder nobody watched becomes a convicted human trafficker, and still manages to drag wrestling's name through the mud after the bell. Hardbody Harrison wasn't just a bad wrestler. He was a walking felony with a promo style ripped from a cult leader's diary and a brain full of barbed wire. Let's be crystal clear. This wasn't just racism, it was cultic abuse with race as the weapon. In 2008, Harrison was sentenced to life in prison for sex trafficking multiple black women under the guise of some warped black power movement. His pitch? Come live in my home gym, call me Master Hardbody, and I'll teach you discipline, freedom, and suplexes. Translation: brainwashing, control, and sex slavery. The trial read like a bad ECW angle written by David Koresh. He told women they were sisters in the struggle, then confiscated their IDs, forced them to strip, and made them call him a king. The only title he ever earned was inmate number 619-33099. This was a scumbag who used his brief WCW career to legitimize his grip on victims. Even referred to himself in third person, like a 1997 rock promo laced with trauma. Worst part? He wasn't even over. The guy did less time on Nitro than the Pyro crew. Shoot interviews don't even touch this one, because no one wants to say his name. Even WCW washed their hands clean. His gimmick wasn't a character, it was a warning sign nobody read. Roddy Piper had charisma, a microphone, and absolutely no idea what century he was living in. At WrestleMania 6, the man painted half his body black to face Bad News Brown. And no, this wasn't some weird tribute to duality or a metaphor for harmony. Piper was out there sweating shoe polish, cutting jokes like he was trying to win a Klansman's talent show. Even worse, he thought he was doing something positive. According to Piper, it was all about showing what it's like to walk in someone else's shoes. That's not empathy, Roddy. That's blackface with a cardio warm-up. And it wasn't just bad optics. Bad News Brown was livid. He told shoot interviews that Piper never even warned him beforehand, that after the match, he wanted to fight him in the back. The makeup didn't even come off right. The guy looked like a malfunctioning Oreo. Bret Hart later admitted it rubbed off on the ring ropes and stayed there all night, like a chemical spill of racial awkwardness. And years later, when asked about it, Piper doubled down. No apology, no regret. Just more long-winded justifications laced with, it was a different time. That's not an excuse, that's a lazy calendar. Tony Atlas, Kamala, and even Virgil all shaded Piper for it. But because he was Roddy, loud, beloved, and white-hot, the whole thing got laughed off as crazy Hot Rod being Hot Rod. Yeah, well, turns out Hot Rod was just code for too famous to cancel. Bill Watts didn't just say the quiet part out loud. He taped it and mailed it to Turner Broadcasting. In 1991, Watts got handed the keys to WCW. But what he brought with him wasn't vision. It was a business plan soaked in Southern fried bigotry. The man talked like the Civil Rights Act was a personal insult. Here's the kicker. This isn't a rumor. His racism was printed, on record, for public consumption. In a 1991 Pro Wrestling Torch interview, Watts straight up said businesses should have the right to refuse service to black customers, claimed it's their property, and doubled down by asking if we should be mad at people for having pride in being white. That's not a misunderstanding. That's an application to join the damn White Citizens Council. And it didn't take long for that poison to catch fire. Hank Aaron, who was working with Turner execs at the time, saw the transcript and personally pushed for Watts to be fired. Imagine being so racist that Hammerin' Hank had to come off the bench to tag you out of the industry. Watts tried to spin it later, saying he was being philosophical. Bro, you weren't Socrates. You were Jim Crow with a headset. Locker room talent. Like Teddy Long and Ron Simmons felt the sting. Simmons once said WCW under Watts tried to control the ceiling on black performers. And if it wasn't for Dusty Rhodes pushing Ron to the top, he'd have stayed frozen in place. Watts may have built Mid-South, but what he really cemented was his legacy as a segregationist in Booker's clothing. You don't run a billion-dollar company for 4 decades without stepping on some toes. Vince McMahon didn't step. He tap danced across racial lines, popped the crowd, and walked off like he'd done them a favor. Let's start with the headline act. Vince dropped the N-word on live TV. 2005, backstage segment. He waddles up to John Cena, dressed like a rejected DJ from a Timberland ad, and says the full N-word. Hard R? No, but let's not split syllables. Then he struts off while Booker T, who once accidentally dropped the N-word himself, gives a shoot-worthy look of, did this guy just out-racist me on camera? Vince didn't apologize. WWE didn't edit it. The company even uploaded it to YouTube for a while, like it was a blooper reel. That wasn't controversial content. That was a white billionaire trying to write black dialogue, but that was just one symptom. From the Ugandan Giants jungle gimmick to Crime Time to the Nation of Domination being booked like a heel gang for demanding respect, Vince's legacy with black wrestlers reads like a parody of Roots produced by Wall Street. And then there's the ACH Jordan Miles t-shirt. Blackface smile, red lips, jet black background. ACH said it looked like a Sambo doll. Vince denied everything, claimed ACH approved it, then quietly buried the whole thing like it was a botched finish at Mania. Even people who defended him, like Mark Henry, Ho admitted, Vince doesn't always understand. Yeah, well, when you've got 40 years of not understanding, that's not confusion. That's corporate amnesia with a Rolex. He called himself the genetic jackhammer. But when it came to race, he was just the chairman of who thought this was okay. Otis Anderson didn't just have heat, he radiated it like a busted space heater that only burned minorities. In the pantheon of wrestling's racist relics, Otis stands alone as the guy who actively bragged about being an a-hole, but behind the gruff act was a walking employment wall for black talent. Ask Thunderbolt Patterson, a legit trailblazer who said Otis blackballed him for speaking out, not just once, not just in one territory. Patterson told Shoot interviews that Otis would deliberately book around black wrestlers, give them the bare minimum, or sabotage their pushes entirely. Even worse, he wasn't subtle. Backstage stories say he casually used the N-word around Rocky Johnson, and when confronted, responded with the kind of smug old-school racism that makes you want to call HR, if HR wasn't also wearing cowboy boots and chewing tobacco. Tony Atlas once said, Otis didn't like him because I smiled too much. What does that even mean? Apparently, being black and happy was pushing it. He had the same attitude toward fans. Otis allegedly refused to run shows in heavily black towns because he didn't think they drew money. Meanwhile, his promos had all the warmth of a gas leak. And let's not forget, he didn't just torch bridges with black talent, he torched the whole damn forest. Ric Flair hated him. Dusty hated him. Sting disliked him because he had muscles and didn't hate people for sport. Otis Anderson was proof that talent can't outshine prejudice when the man with the pencil is carving lines in stone. And even as the business changed, Otis didn't. He just grew older, louder, and less relevant, like racism itself. This wasn't just a list of guys with bad gimmicks. This was a tour through the grease trap of pro wrestling, where power and prejudice met at the catering table and shook hands over a cold coffee and worse opinions. What we saw wasn't heat, it was hate, dressed up in trunks and handed a microphone. Some of these men smiled through their bigotry. Some barked it loud, and some weaponized it with the kind of authority that could kill a career before the entrance music hit. They said it was just the times. Nah, these weren't slips. They were full-on dives into the shallow end of the moral pool, and the ripple effect is still splashing across every new generation trying to clean up the mess. Wrestling didn't invent racism, but for decades, it gave it a spotlight, a promo package, and a multi-year push. And while the ring lights are brighter and the merch more polished, the shadow of all this never really left. It just learned to smile more. If you made it this far, you're not just watching wrestling history. You're watching what happens when silence puts on a headset and starts booking. Now do your part. Like the video, like you're smashing legacy contracts, subscribe like you're pulling the paint off a fake apology, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.